Hey guys, another Tim Cain reaction this time, planning for a sequel. This is relevant because we are planning for a sequel for Coin Pusher Realms. Let's see if Tim has any insight that he can provide to us for planning a sequel. And also, hello YouTube. And Tim.
Hi everyone, it's me, Tim.
Tim's got his chipmunk
Today
voice
I want to
again.
talk about planning for a sequel.
Tim.
Okay, sorry about that. I
Got a new microphone. There, my voice is normal again.
Wait, hold on. Did we watch this one? Wait, hold on. Hold on. Didn't he chipmunk us before? Hold on, Tim. I know what you're doing. Where is it? Why does this seem relevant? No, we didn't. He did it twice.
It's got voice modulation and a bunch of fun stuff.
I got deja vu.
It's a
Sorry,
birthday
Tim.
gift from Robert. So I won't do that again.
It's okay, Tim.
But
You gave me
have
deja
fun.
vu, though.
And yes, this video is going up on my birthday because the
Oh, happy
planning for a
birthday.
sequel question came from a master member, so it's getting snuck into the queue. Otherwise, it would have shown up in October. Anyway, Matt P asked, a new studio is building their first RPG with a brand new IP. If it is successful, they will be asked for a sequel. Otherwise, it's one and done. What advice and guidance would you give to the different parts of the development team, designers, writers, programmers, artists, to lay the groundwork for a sequel that will seem natural and not have forced retconning of first game plot elements and other etc., but also not leave the ending of the first game feeling like a cliffhanger or incomplete?
Wait, that is a really long question. Hold on, let me listen to that again.
First RPG with a... Anyway, Matt P asked, a new studio is building their first RPG with a brand new IP. If it is successful, they will be asked for a sequel. Otherwise, it's one and done. What advice and guidance would you give to the different parts of the development team, designers, writers, programmers, artists, to lay the groundwork for a sequel that will seem natural and not have forced retconning of first game plot elements and other etc.?
I don't know a lot of sequels that have forced retconning. I mean, I get the question though. I get it because if you don't plan for a sequel when you're making your first game, you could run into a bit of a roadblock with proper pre-production for the second game. I agree with that. And especially, by the way, planning for a sequel, if you know that you're building a studio to make open world RPGs or something, then you should also develop your tools so that the production of the sequel goes easier. Because if you develop a whole bunch of poorly coded one-off solutions, even though you need that same tool in the second, in the sequel game that you probably are going to make, then you're gonna have to remake it from scratch again, which just wastes development time. Oh, that's different protagonist. Well, that can happen. Yeah, I guess if like somebody dies, right? Not everybody can be Mass Effect. No, it's hard to make something like Mass Effect, which is the reason why something like Mass Effect hasn't been made since.
But also not leave the ending of the first game feeling like a cliffhanger or incomplete.
Yeah.
Is trying to plan for a sequel ahead of time even worth spending time and effort for? It's a good question. Let me turn off notes here. Sounds. That's a good question. I've done a video on sequels, and I'll link it below. That one was basically the pros and cons of doing a sequel for a game. And I did list a lot of pros and a lot of cons. Personally, I am not a fan of making sequels. If I was given a choice, I would much rather make a new IP than make a sequel to one of my IPs or even work in someone else's IP.
Tim, you would not like the game industry as it is now. All they do is make sequels. They don't make new IP. That's called risk.
However, I did list some pros to doing...
Yeah, when you say make a good story in a cool world, use the world again, not the protagonist. I don't know. I don't know if I agree with Tim. I don't mind making a sequel, but I suppose it depends in what form. When we were making Colden Chronicles, alchemy-driven RPG game, right? Where you make potions, and the potion you give and the way that you speak to people can change their fates, right? This was very much a game that was meant to have those choices of the player get saved and used in another game. it didn't have to be a direct sequel where you play as the same character. It could also have been a different type of game in the same world, chronologically taking place after that first game. And so therefore we read the previous decisions to determine, is this character alive? Should they show up? Did you make the character evil? Things like that. Elder Scrolls, yeah, I think Elder Scrolls works, and that's a good way to make a sequel. I guess it just depends what form. There's so many different ways to make sequels. Yeah. Hmm.
Doing sequels because they do exist. And this video will be more on how you can plan for it. Like if you're making a game and you think you might be doing a sequel, what you can do. And I'm saying I'm giving a lot of advice from experience, because when I made Fallout, there was no sequel planned. It was a one and done. In fact, while I was making Fallout, I was pretty much reminded all the time it's B tier. It was a B tier game, and as soon as I was done with it, they wanted me off and making a D&D game because that's where the money was. So we had to scramble to make a sequel for that game. When I made Arcanum,
Sounds like Dragon Age 2.
we already were thinking, we were open to the idea of making a sequel, even though we didn't make it with a sequel planned. But guess what? When we were finished and Sierra, the publisher, said, hey, do you want to do a sequel? We not only said yes, but we already had an idea of how to do it, which leveraged a really interesting NPC from the base game. And we were already talking with Valve about their Source engine. So we did an entire spec of a Arcanum 2 Journey to the Center of Arcanum, possibly first person on that engine. I have a video below that talks about the design for Journey to the Center of the
I actually think that bringing up Bethesda is an interesting thing to talk about, because they have a very specific way that they do their sequels, which is Morrowind, Fallout 3, Skyrim, Fallout 4. They do this. They like stagger their sequels, and I think that is a nice way to do it. I mean, it certainly makes people wait a long time before a sequel in the IP that they most enjoy, but also it does give you time to receive feedback, to think about a different game for like maybe 5 to 10 years, however long it takes for Bethesda to make games, and then jump back in once you have learned some more, received feedback, seen what people liked and didn't like, improved your engine, grown your team a bit. I think that is a really nice way of doing it. If only it ended up resulting in better games, it would be nice for Bethesda, but the concept is nice. I can say that.
of Arcanum. Which brings us up to recent, when Leonard Borarsky and I did the design, the initial laid down the initial groundwork for a brand new IP for the Outer Worlds. We thought about sequels from the very beginning. And the way we did that was we did a lot of lore that we knew the narrative and quest designers would need, because NPCs would need to know this lore to talk about the world and to make quests that go on, and also to understand what factions liked each other and what didn't. But embedded in that lore were a bunch of seeds for possible things we could do in a sequel. Nothing specific, but lots of seeds.
That was one of the reasons why for Golden Chronicles we wanted it to take place out in the woods, right? So not in a city, and you could never visit the cities. And it was more about laying down those seeds and seeing which ones people really enjoyed, or which characters people really liked to talk to, and then going with a sequel that made sense to one of those things that was popular. Obviously, this didn't come to realization, but that was kind of similar to what we wanted to make as well.
So that makes me want to answer Matt's question. Instead of doing it by group, like designers, narrative designers, and programmers and artists, I want to talk about how there's really two ways you can plan for a sequel. And then I'll add a third way, which is something you can't plan for, you just have to wait. And those two ways are basically the non-deliberate way, which is kind of on the fly as you're making the game, and then deliberate ways that you actually consciously make an effort to do when you're making the game. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the non-deliberate ones first. By non-deliberately, I don't mean you're doing it unconsciously. I do mean that you're as you're making the game, you will find that you have content you're going to remove. I talk about this deleted content. I have videos about deleted content from various of my games.
Yeah. I haven't
Sometimes they're
seen many
deleted because they
examples of
don't
that though.
quite fit with the story you're making. Sometimes they're deleted because the publisher says, I don't want you to do that.
Time budget.
Frequently, they're deleted because you simply run out of time.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't have time to do this. And maybe you have time to design it, but you don't have time to do the art for it, or the level design, or programming the additional features that are needed, or play.
Finishing is so much of the work, right? Designing it's easy. It's the cheapest. Finishing is where all the money is. That makes sense.
Additional features that are needed, or play testing that whole area.
Oh yeah, that can take a
And
long
this can
time
be a
too.
wide
Especially with
range
RPGs.
of things. When I say deleted content, I just don't mean a map. People think, oh, they deleted a map. Sometimes it could be a quest line. Maybe you have a quest line that goes on existing maps, but you don't have time to do all the dialogue and play testing and get it interacting and drop all the items that are needed and get all the NPCs reacting to all the quest states correctly. So you drop that quest.
You might even drop quests, by the way, because it interrupts the pacing. I mean, how many times have you guys played RPG games? You enter a new town and they just flood you with shit tons of quests and it feels overwhelming. And it's like, okay, I want to enjoy this. I want to do it, but you've given me like 10 different leads to follow and you have a bit like analysis paralysis. I mean, this is a case where you might want to cut or stagger that content so that the player doesn't feel overwhelmed. And that can help with the initial perception of entering a new city. You don't want player to enter the new city and to feel something negative. You want them to feel awe and wonder. And when that's paced really well, the player doesn't feel like they're overwhelmed. And they're going to enjoy it. They might even seek out quests because they've entered a new city. And they're like, okay, where can I get something new to do here? Where can I meet some people? Yeah, a lot of times happens to me all the time, especially as a completionist. Wait until the Gen AI NPCs come along and talk about utter BS, not even related to real quests, they're just trolling you. Or it could be like the AI generated NPCs that are giving you like radiant quests or are very, very blatantly telling you about something like, did you hear that the troll beat up the farmer recently? And then like they have their NPC making eye contact with you in some like effing terp way where it's like, this is really fucking horrible. I just feel obligated to accept those side quests and then I end up with so many quests. Rex, I agree. I really do agree. And I want to normalize a game, an RPG, where refusing quests is sometimes considered a good thing morally. I want to make a game where accepting a quest is not considered the norm, and we encourage people to think about the quest that they're taking and the people that they're helping. I'm really not a fan of the gamification and this formula of helping somebody equals reward and is good thing. And you go on a side quest and pick up 3 more quests on the way to complete the first one. Yeah, that too. Oh god. Yep. Yeah, Skyrim is a really bad is a really bad culprit for this, right? Where you can just end up with some massive quest log because you're in the location of receiving a quest. You might as well just take it so that you don't have to come back or forget that there was a quest here. I agree with that. I 100% agree.
Maybe it's a particular NPC. Maybe you have so many NPCs that you've exceeded some kind of text limit for your game, which games often have. It's part of the budget because you know you're going to have to localize all that text.
Voice.
Maybe you hit a limit and you're like, I can't have this many characters. Well, I've got this really chatty character that only gives away 2 side quests. I could easily delete that character.
That's really important, by the way, is when you're planning the budget for a game like this, for a big open world RPG, when you are pitching to a publisher, they want to know the word count because, like he said, that's going to determine how many languages you need. You know, are you doing just efigs? Is it going to be, the big 5? Are you going to be localizing it into A lot of the Asian languages too, in which case then you have to add that onto it. Different languages cost different amounts per word. And then you need LQA, so you need people who can actually test all of that dialogue. So if you haven't made proper tools for testing out those quests and seeing those different dialogue options, then your LQA testers are going to be wasting a lot of time. There's so many aspects to that. And yeah, that text length is one that can very easily go over budget because you might just be throwing content into the game, not thinking about it, and you realize, oh shit, I have 100,000 words. That's a lot of money. That is a lot of money. Some languages are as expensive as 10 cents per word. That's $10,000 to localize into that language, not including LQA. For individual novels getting requests for alternate language support. Yeah, it's like, okay, if I sell 500 copies, maybe we can afford it.
You do. And then there could be features, there could be system mechanics that you want to put in the game that either you run out of time to design, or you run out of time to code, or you don't have time to do the art that would support those features, or you run out of time to test those features. So you cut back.
Yep.
All of those things, instead of throwing them away, you should put them on a list of, hey, maybe I'll do that in a sequel. That is a great non-deliberate way to grow a list of things you want to do in a sequel.
All right.
However, there's a lot of deliberate things you can do while you're making the game. It'll sound similar to this, but it's stuff you're really doing. It's not stuff that you want to do and you run out of time or it doesn't fit or whatever. It's you put in a quest that wraps up at the end, but maybe a little bit of a mystery. Like you resolve you got the item, you returned it to its owner, but you never found out why the person who stole it wanted it in the first place. And there's a hint that there was a bigger thing going on that they needed that item for, but you don't know what it was.
I think a good example of something similar to that was, and this could have been planned to be fair, or it could have just been a Easter egg that they turned into a DLC, which was Hearts of Stone for Witcher 3 with, what was his name? Like not the Timekeeper, that's Borderlands 4, the guy in charge of time, right? Like the main, I guess you could say, protagonist or antagonist of Hearts of Stone was a NPC that you could see in the background of multiple cutscenes in the base game before the DLC was even came out. And a lot of people didn't catch him there, but then at the start of Hearts of Stone, you get that revealed to you of where he was in the background of those, listening to you, following along in your journey. So that's a fun way that you can turn something that may have just been an Easter egg, or you can hint at this new DLC as having been something that, observant players would have noticed in the base game or in the previous game. Yeah, I think that there's very clever ways to do it that don't undermine the original game's intention or story in any way. And a good one, like Tim says here, is like, oh, you did a side quest where you gave a knife to a bandit, and it was some like magical knife, and it felt weird at the time, but then you get shown the trailer for game number 2, and you see the bandit with the knife, and you realize he's part of a cult, and delivering that knife allowed them to absorb the souls of people that they stabbed the knife into, and they're, I don't know, doing some crazy cult thing where they're bringing back a god, and you're like, oh shit. I did that. Oopsies. I was just trying to help a guy. What was I supposed to do?
Maybe there's storylines that end, maybe not on a cliffhanger, but they end on something like, well, the storyline was completed, but we didn't wrap up every loose end. Like, we found the murderer, but we don't know what the motive was.
I'll tell you, a game that did that a lot was Mass Effect 1. And to some extent, Dragon Age 1 as well. And I was replaying the Mass Effect series with my wife because she's never played, right? And it was actually pretty staggering to see how many parts of Mass Effect 1's storyline don't wrap up, especially with side quests. Like, you just do it, and then you're like, oh, so what was the point of that? And it almost made me think, as a game designer, if a game like Mass Effect 1 released today, it wouldn't be well received because there's so many things that wouldn't be finalized in that game. It's almost like Mass Effect 1 on its own is not that great of a game, but because the choices you make carry over and have impact on Mass Effect 2 and 3, it makes Mass Effect 1 more enjoyable because you're continuing that story and have those choices that carry throughout the entire series. But because of that, you almost have to make a first game that doesn't fully realize its potential, which is a pretty big risk that I don't know if a lot of developers or publishers would be willing to make these days. Something to think about. Something to think about.
There also may be like you've done a map, and you know that the map was you have a world map. What's going on outside of it? What's going on in the nearby places?
Yeah.
Maybe it's a world, you know, and there's countries that border the country your game takes place in. Maybe you're making a space game and you're like, we never got to go to these stars and we never got to go to these planets. There's also a lot of very deliberate
Starfield.
sequels buried in your lore. Basically things you can expand on. Who were these people in the faction? Why did they do what they did? What are these places? We didn't really do much with this place. We talked about this mountain that you can see in the skybox.
See that
you
mountain?
Can't actually go there.
You can climb it.
What about
I actually think Starfield's a pretty good example here where, we had that lore of House Varun and the planet of Varun Kai. And I think that the DLC was a good way to explore the planet and the people of that. I know it wasn't very well received, and people are not very big fans of Starfield. It seems like a love it or hate it kind of thing. But I did enjoy the DLC, and I thought that method of exploring Varun Kai was a good addition to the Starfield universe and Starfield lore. I'm just weird, I guess. I did not hate Starfield. I'm just weird like that.
these items? This item's in the game. Who made it? Where did it come from? Why was it so important? Or maybe you hear about events taking place, but those events aren't part of this game. Maybe there was a big battle somewhere. Maybe people are preparing for war that's coming in a few years. The game itself won't take place. These events won't take place. They either predate it or are coming later. They're foreshadowed. These are things you can expand in the sequel.
You want to know the even crazier thing than a sequel? Is Red Dead Redemption 2, a prequel. They took an incredible game back on the PS3 360 era of Red Dead Redemption 1, and they managed to make a prequel of a game that you already know how it's going to end. And even you know how the sequel to it's going to end, and somehow successfully pull off a compelling and interesting story that you already know how it's going to end for. I mean, that to me is pretty impressive.
And these are a great way of doing deliberate seeding of your game's lore and characters and quests and items to provide leverage later for a sequel.
Yeah, seeding is a good way to put it.
Now, in addition to these, those are the two main ways, the deliberate and the non-deliberate. However,
Red Dead 1 and 2 had the same story. Red Dead 1 I'm not going to spoil too much for anybody who hasn't played it, but you play as John Marston, who is approached by members of the government, and he's given an ultimatum, like, either help us track down old members of your gang, or, fuck you, essentially, right? So, during the story of Red Dead Redemption 1, you are tracking down old members of your previous gang and trying to bring them to justice. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a prequel to that, where you play during the heyday and fall of that old gang. So you know how it's going to end because you know the characters that are alive and not alive in Red Dead Redemption 1, but somehow they're able to tell a masterful story of the fall of that gang and how it led to the events of Red Dead Redemption 1, this sequel, chronologically. Very, very interesting setup and honestly amazing. One of the best games I've ever played was Red Dead 2.
Always recommend to teams, and especially new teams, because they tend not to think about this. When you're designing, when you get to your sequel and you've got all these ideas for things you want to put in it, save some bandwidth for post-ship ideas. And what I mean is, you may have a huge list of features and NPCs and quests and storylines and maps that you want to make for the sequel. Don't fill up all of your available time to make the sequel with those. Save about 10 to 20% for things you will come up with after the game ships. And here's where those ideas will come from. There will always be people on your development team that will go, gee, I wish we had done this. I wish we'd had
Yep.
grenades, or I wish grenades had shown arcs, or I wish we'd had a grenade launcher or whatever. And you're like, yeah, we just didn't have time to do all the art and code for that. Boom, sequel.
Yeah,
Maybe
or just like the grenades is a good example. Or then you have the like, oh, I wish we had delved into this storyline more, or this planet or region of the map more. It's like, okay, let's combine the two. Let's introduce the new region, and we introduce grenades. Maybe one of these is part of like a free update, right? Like the grenades is free update, but the DLC adds the new region, and that we have some post-release content to put out. Starfield's a classic example of developers not understanding what people actually asked for and making a system that, while having the same name, isn't what they wanted. Exploration was a big selling point for Starfield, but the planet 100 million meter from the point of interest removed, getting lost on the way to quests that people call exploration. Yeah, I know that before Starfield came out, we talked on stream about how, or maybe it wasn't on stream, maybe this was to friends that I had worked with. I talked about how points of interest would be the biggest, to me, system of interest, because if they don't do it well enough, I mean, what can you really do with that? You only have 10 points of interest. I'm going to get bored pretty easily after I see each of those 10 points of interest correct once. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought while talking about it. I think Starfield was just, to me, it was so different from Elder Scrolls and Fallout that it isn't a bad game in a vacuum, but it's from a studio that has never made that kind of game before, delivering it to an audience that didn't ask for that kind of game. And so I think that there was a big miscommunication between the people who thought Starfield was for them and who Starfield was actually for, on top of certain systems in that game just being very undercooked or underutilized. I want to see a Starfield 2, and I hope that they make it and learn their lessons, because I think that the world as a whole and the people that they introduced into it are interesting. And I think now that they've shown, hey, we want to make a more down-to-earth kind of humanized story, as opposed to the more fantastical comedic nature of Fallout or the low medieval fantasy of Elder Scrolls, there is a market for Starfield, but they just need to improve some of the systems that they, I think, messed up in Starfield 1, let's say. I don't know, Starfield's a whole topic. I'd love to talk about it, but I'm disappointed, but also not super disappointed by Starfield. Hope they come up with some medication for motion sickness so I can play first. Did you have a problem with like the six degree of freedom movement? Or was it something else? Maybe the FOV?
Maybe it comes from the reviews. Maybe, 50 reviews come out for your game and 40 of them go, gee, I really wish they had had more multi-level, climbing,
Yes.
parkour, jumping. They didn't have anything like that. Or maybe it's like the game was fun and everything, but there were never any puzzles you had to solve. It was all, stealing and killing and talking. Maybe you want to put some puzzles in the sequel. Or the players themselves. If you go on forums where people are talking about your game, you will frequently see a trend where people are like talking about some feature or loose end that they really wish the game had, or in the case of the loose end, had tied up. And you can do that. You can say, hey, this is a good idea of something we should put in a sequel. Because these come later after the game ships, you really want to save some time to do it. It also shows your developer and reviewers and the players of your game that you're listening to them.
So, I just said this on the last video, but your first patch and your first communication to players after the release of a game dictates so much of what players will be thinking and expecting from your game. I'll use a really, really good example recently of a game that I had hoped would have better communication, which was... Oh, I don't see it here. Killing Floor 3. Here's the current reviews of Killing Floor 3. It's not the greatest. And it's not because the game is horrible, but because after release they had like barely any communication about problems that they had with it. And then the fixes that they had were about like fixing server problems or a couple of, bugs which were fine, but they weren't actually talking about improving the fact that the game feels like an early access release without enough content. And it's just like that's all they're talking about. And yet these were developers that have implemented a cash shop into their premium game. So it's a premium game with microtransactions on release day instead of more content like new maps or new game modes or something like that. So, I mean, this is what you get. You get a game that has this sort of response to it, and you have more players in previous Killing Floor titles than their latest one. That's how you fuck it up. That's how you mess it up. I think, meanwhile, you have, maybe there's another good example recently. Dying Light, right, came out on what day? This was the 18th. The first thing they do is they say we're grateful, and then they put out an announcement about hotfix that's incoming. And then they put out the hotfix. Like, that's perfect. Just be communicative. Be responsible about it. Responsible? I don't think that's the word. Be responsible.
This is a great source of things to do.
Responsible.
By the way, everything I just said, everything from the non-deliberate ways of doing a sequel to the deliberate ways of doing a sequel to the post-ship ideas for the sequel, all this applies to DLC too. When you're making a DLC, that's where all the sources of ideas can come from of what you want to do.
I'm going to tell you though, when you're making a DLC or making a second game, something to add that I don't think Tim has touched on is just building your game to support that. I have worked on games where we were so strapped for time that we just had to hotwire our systems to work, and you had people wanting more content or wanting something that, a feature that seems small, but because of the way that we've designed and developed the systems, we can't do it. Like, we would have to refactor the entire game or an entire large part of the game just to get this small feature working. And refactoring it's going to take 3 months that we can't afford to do because we didn't sell enough copies. So, when you're in pre-production, you do need to determine, okay, is this a larger universe, right? Are we making a sequel to Cauldron Chronicles or a sequel to Coin Pusher Reloaded? Or I'm sorry, Coin Pusher Realms. Or are we going to go with a different model of content release? For Coin Pusher Realms, we want to make DLC. We want to release smaller realms that players can choose which ones they want to have and which ones they don't want to have. And so we need to, in pre-production, make sure that we develop a system for switching between those realms and that it is super robust and that we can add another realm to that without breaking underlying systems. And if we can do this, then we have ensured that by the time we have our full release, we are ready to pump out new realms with a really good pipeline for production and just keep adding on to that, knowing that it's not going to break those underlying systems or accrue tech debt, right? So this is one of those things that you would have to determine for pre-production. Another one is tools. If you know you're making an open world RPG and you're going to have sequels and you want a custom dialogue system, then you should make that dialogue system in a way that is modular and scalable enough that you can rip that out of the game, put it into a sequel, and you have your dialogue system with maybe a little bit of, connecting or rewiring needed to get it working with this new code base. You don't need to do that with every system. Full modular games are a pipe dream. They're not really possible or a good reality for a larger studio, and you might not need some small systems to be scalable or to be modular in other games. It's a waste of time to make them so. But for the ones that you know will be necessary, you should take the time to plan them out, design them, and document them, and prepare them in a way that is going to be usable to save you time and therefore money on your future games.
Now, the difference between a DLC and a sequel is the DLC has to fit into the base game somewhere. Usually it's something that it can be middle or late game, but it's part of the base game. Suddenly you can now go to this other map, or suddenly these dungeons which were sealed are unsealed in the DLC. Because of that, they have to connect to existing maps. They have to fit in somewhere in your storyline, even if it's completely optional in a side quest. You don't have those restrictions in sequels. But sometimes having a restriction like that can really help you, because it constrains you creatively and forces you to kind of narrow the scope of what you're trying to do, which often makes for a better game. Sometimes if the bounding box for your ideas is so big, if you have a game that could be about anything, it's frequently about nothing. DLC can be very focused.
True, by the way. A game for everybody is a game for no one. And this is where you see a lot of AAA companies failing right now, is because they are spending $200-300 million on their production. Therefore, they have to make that money back and more, oftentimes 2 to 3 times as much as the investment, because they have investors, and investors want their money to grow. So they need to make back, nearly $1 billion in some cases of sales. Well, there aren't that many gamers in the world who want to play the game, so what do they have to do? Increase the price and or increase the size of the audience. Sometimes both. And so then you get $80 games with nothing risky or unique about them, because they didn't want to put in something divisive or controversial, because it would lower the audience a bit, and therefore they would lose more money. But then at the end of it, you get this game that just has nothing interesting to say and doesn't take you any place mentally or morally or philosophically that makes you rethink something in your life or in the real world, right? Talos Principle 2 made me think more about the real world and philosophy and morality and ethics than Dragon Age of the Veilguard did. And it's Dragon Age. This is a game where you have this grim dark fantasy almost, and I should be questioning my choices and my motives and who I team up with and who I support or don't support. And Dragon Age Veilguard just felt like I was in some, 2-year-old psychotherapy session where everything is happy and you shit roses. And if somebody says the word ass, it's a big conundrum.
And that's something that you have for a DLC that you may not have for the sequel, because you may want a brand new area with a whole new storyline and set of characters for the sequel. Anyway, that is my general advice for any team, new or not, who've made a game and maybe being put in a position to make a sequel for it. That is a great source of content for that sequel. And I hope that answers your question, Matt P.
I enjoyed that. That was a good video. And I really like the idea of seeding. That was very nice. Good video. Another good one from Tim. Go give this a like. And go give Tim a sub for that. That was wonderful. Let's do one more. So if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching that one. And we will have one more out. This one will probably be coming out on Thursday on my day off. So see you in the next one, YouTube.